Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet.
Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in Science and Space Policy.
And I'm a PhD in Computer Science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, for this week, for all you creative folk out there, we're celebrating our first month of over 1,000 downloads. Ad Astra and Elemental FM are announcing our first t-shirt design competition. All we ask is that the design be a maximum of 14 by 16 inches, 300 DPI, and use no more than 3 colors. Send your designs to Ad Astra at elemental.fm by September 30th to qualify.
And so we will pick the 3 best designs and put it up to a vote by you, the listeners. The winner of the contest gets to join us on a special segment of the show, a free t-shirt, and our undying gratitude, of course. So remember, that's Ad Astra at elemental.fm. Get those in by September 30th.
Yeah. All right. So what are we talking about this week?
Well, so before we get started, once again, as we announced last week, please remember to donate as much as you can to the victims of Hurricane Harvey. We listed 3 organizations in which you can donate last week, and I'd like to just rattle those again. American Red Cross. You can go to www.redcross.org/HP/Harvey2. They're consistently the folks to donate to for crisis after crisis. They've had their issues, but they seem to have worked many of those out. So check out the Red Cross. Global Giving, which is a charity crowdfunding site that is attempting to raise $2 million to be used exclusively for local relief and recovery efforts. That's www.globalgiving.org. As well as Airbnb, which is the hospitality company that you and I love to book for many of our vacations. They're working to coordinate people in need of a place to stay with people willing to offer a free room. That's www.airbnb.com. So without further ado, this week we will be talking about the Trump administration's pick for the NASA administrator position in Latest from Washington. We'll put the spotlight once again on Peggy Whitson in our Space News Highlight of the Week. We have a brief portion of that story cut out specifically for international news. And finally, we'll talk SLS and Hurricane Harvey in Latest in Tech. And then we'll talk a little bit of Saturn in Coming Soon to Space. So, Jack, did anything go on in Washington at all this week?
So probably the biggest announcement coincided with the least surprising announcement about the Trump administration plan for NASA. So for a very long time, we have thought that Jim Bridenstine, the congressman from Oklahoma's 1st District, would become the next NASA administrator under a Republican administration. And so after the 2016 election, he was often the name that was thrown around both in closed doors in the meeting rooms around the Capitol, as well as in the public eye. But finally, the administration has put aside all of its, news for I think it was at 8 p.m. on Friday, and they went and announced Bridenstine as their pick for NASA administrator. So a little bit about Bridenstine. So he has represented the Oklahoma 1st District for only 2 terms. He's a 2-term congressman. He just won re-election for the first time in 2016. He said he was going to limit himself to 3 terms. He's one of those folks that believes in term limits, and so he was going to self-limit himself to only 3 terms. And so he was originally the executive director for the Tulsa Air and Space Museum and Planetarium. So he has a lot of interest in the civil side of space from a public outreach perspective. And he was also in the Air Force. So he has that DoD lens on when it comes to space. So he kind of comes from across the board. He has an interest in every area that NASA deals with. interfacing with the Air Force and the DoD on military space missions, working with the NASA centers on civilian space missions, and then developing commercial programs for the Space Administration to help foster a robust space economy. A couple of years ago, the text I have up right here is from 2015 to the 114th Congress. He announced or introduced the HR 4945 American Space Renaissance Act. And the whole idea behind this act was to completely revamp the United States space infrastructure, or at least the governing side of it, including changes to DoD space matters, as well as some fairly big changes to the way NASA would be doing things, including setting up 20-year, 10-year, and even further year budgets and strategic plans. So he's really into space. You wouldn't think Oklahoma 1st District, but having represented the Tulsa Air and Space Museum, as well as many of the commercial contributors to the commercial space programs around the country and around the world, he seems to be a very solid pick on paper. There are some concerns, however, and Newton, I think you have been sort of looking at some of these concerns. There's a great article in Space News about this, but you had sort of your take on it as well.
Yeah, so Bridenstine, he's historically been a major ally in Congress when it comes to space funding. You and I know that from our work with even with the Planetary Society. Pick isn't that surprising, but my only concern, and the concern that many have voiced, has been some of his concrete stances on climate change. Effectively, he is a climate change denier, or at least has postured himself to be that. But however, he has pushed for improvement to things like U.S. weather forecasting capabilities. He's had bills in the mid to late 2000s. I'm sorry, not in the mid to late, in the early 2010s, specifically focused on improving our weather forecasting bills that he sponsored. But the big controversy surrounding him is that he does deny climate change, which for the head of NASA is that's an interesting pick. Now, with that said, we've talked about in the past, there's a sense that with this administration, the push is to have NOAA take on some of these climate change research and forecasting capabilities. So it's a big we'll see. I don't like to speculate about what Bridenstine will and won't do with some of NASA's programs, because pretty much anything that I can think of that relates to climate change can also relate to weather forecasting, right? That's not across the board, but those programs can. I'm confident that many of the programs that I was worried about, unless there's more insight from the administration, will be fairly safe from getting slashed in terms of the climate change programs. I just think that they'll be marketed differently, effectively, to the top, to the administrator.
Yeah, so this is an interesting place to put folks in the scientific community that work on climate change issues. It puts them in a very weird place where you've had the last 10 years, you could even argue the last 20 years of climate change denial from the Republican Party and from those conservative members in the House, including some Democrats, of climate change denial of a desire to cut the budgets for NASA and NOAA's Earth science programs. However, looking at the NASA budget proposals, not the ones from the administration, because the administration one completely cuts the Earth science program. It cut all 5 major satellite programs across both NASA and NOAA.
Right, not completely, but kills all of the important programs effectively.
Yeah. But so that was a major concern. But the House and Senate have both come out with, albeit not great programs when it comes to Earth science, but keeping the funding essentially the same. One of the things I remember we had talked about a few episodes ago when the Senate and House budgets came out, or the requests came out, was that, technically the Earth Science Program isn't growing with inflation, so you could see it as a $50 million cut. But what it does is it keeps everything kind of staying the course at current budgetary levels, not rising with inflation, which could, in small parts, hurt the program, but is not doing what the administration wants to do, is and can completely cut many major satellite programs and in a sense, cripple the Earth science programs in both NASA and NOAA for multiple years in the future.
I'd also say that Bridenstine has what I would call low-level denial of climate change. I mean, his official position, and he's even been quoted as saying this. He stated in a 2016 interview, "I would say that the climate is changing. It has always changed. There were periods of time long before the internal combustion engine when the Earth was much warmer than it is today," which is sort of the low denial route. It's not the it's the I don't think that man is causing climate change, which still puts climate change as a danger in his eyes. At least that's what I get from reading that interview. There's a 2016 interview with Aerospace America where he talked about it. But so that makes him still want to actually study it. I mean, he even said in that interview that he has no problem studying the climate. That's what these assets are supposed to do. They study the climate, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't see a ton of new programs coming about. But as far as existing climate change programs, even though they have other purposes, but one major thing that they do is study climate, like JPSS, GOES-R, so on and so forth. I can see those not getting slashed too heavily with Bridenstine. It is concerning to have to have an administrator who isn't, who still falls into the denial category, but at least it's low denial. It's not high denial. The climate's not changing at all. It's everything's hunky-dory. The Earth is perfect. It's low denial. Okay, the climate's changing. It's changed before. Blah blah blah. It's concerning to not have him understand man-made climate change. At the same time, he understands that that the climate is changing.
Yeah. So, I mean, isn't this sort of a horrible place to, kind of a depressing place to be too, that we're like, oh, well, at least he isn't like, a complete denier. He's low level, he's not much of a risk.
I categorize my denials, my denialists.
But I mean, so, and I think maybe also a really good point that, I've sort of been thinking about a lot recently, having talked to a lot of people about this, is that, the NASA administrator does not set policy and he doesn't set the budget. That's all Congress. Right. So the fight over climate change and investments in climate change research is happening in the science committees and in the appropriations committees.
Yeah, they do talk to NASA in order to get insight about that budget, or at least their staffers do. I don't want to give folks a misnomer there. They will talk to him specifically about what needs to be invested.
Not necessarily. So a lot of times what happens in this process is when they're setting the budget is that Congress interfaces with the Congressional Relations Division of NASA and with the Budgetary Division of NASA. The administrator has oversight over all of these processes, but with the way that Bridenstine has been talking about how he wants to be involved in NASA, and this also, I mean, part of the reason why we're not very surprised that Bridenstine got picked was because he's been saying me for the last 4 years, basically, even well before the Trump administration, that he wanted to be the next person to shape space policy in the United States, including the Space Renaissance Act was a major milestone in that and a major indicator of what he wants to do as NASA administrator. A lot of it is in the strategic planning and long-term health of the program. It's not necessarily in the day-to-day or year-to-year operations. So that's the benefit we have here, is that he has, although he has oversight over those programs and, he can hire and fire people. Hiring and firing in the federal government is a very difficult process anyway, but he can move people around and project onto the program his ideas and his misconceptions on a lot of these issues. But he is going to be very concerned with the commercial spaceflight issues and the military spaceflight issues, a little bit less so on the Earth science front. And I understand everyone's hesitation about this, but I don't think that Bridenstine is going to be, a worst case scenario would have been if Trump had not appointed Bridenstine and appointed some, real estate lawyer in New York that no one's ever heard of that, posts about climate change denial 3 times a day on Facebook.
Yeah, that's true. If it was someone who seriously cared and took issue with climate change, but someone with passionate views is going to have a more direct issue with it. But I want to go back to the point about the congressional relations folks. This is an area that, even Congress is concerned, and there's an article that we have on the docket here, and we can just kind of flip into that. Marco Rubio was even making comments about this. He's just concerned that we shouldn't sort of have these controversies about something as important as NASA, and with someone who has been has been involved with Congress this much, I think that Bridenstine might have a little bit more involvement with the congressional relations piece than we're thinking, than past administrators, because he's lived in Congress for even just a few years.
Yeah, so he is going to bring a lot of experience, I think, to that aspect of it, of how Congress and NASA will interact. Previously, just basic civics lesson, NASA is a part of the executive branch, not the legislative branch. So if the Congress wants to do something about NASA, generally they go through the administration, and then the administration sort of pushes them over to NASA if the question's too complex, or they really need that insight. What we're seeing here is that with Bridenstine coming in, there's going to be almost more of a direct line between NASA and Congress than there has been previously. And on a lot of issues, that could be very beneficial, because it's going to be limiting the power that the president has over making major changes to space policy without consulting both parties. That's been something that has happened a lot in the past, and even the Obama administration was pretty guilty of that. With the Constellation program, completely cutting that program was sort of without the consent of either Congress or NASA. They both Congress and NASA agreed that the budget was, being overrun and the time schedules were off. But it was the administration that eventually made that final decision on Constellation. What Bridenstine's going to do is open up those channels so that it's going to be a direct Congress to NASA conversation. To the point about Marco Rubio, I kind of do not really care what he says, because the only reason he hates Bridenstine is because Bridenstine didn't endorse him in the presidential primary.
Yeah.
It's politics as usual for Marco Rubio. And Bill Nelson also has his, I think Marco has some legitimate concerns about adding controversy to space policy. That is definitely something that we do not want to happen. And that is why I'm a little leery when people bash Bridenstine as, ill-experienced and not on the side of science, when, we've had previous NASA administrators like Sean O'Keefe, the predecessor to Mike Griffin, or even the first NASA administrator, James Webb, did not have a science background or any scientific experience.
Right.
So I think
the concern of scientists, however, is the climate change issue. Right. Let's be clear. The concern of most scientists with the Bridenstine pick is the climate change issue. You see that on. I've spent the last week on the March for Science Facebook page, like talking people down off of the ledge when it came to the Bridenstine pick, of saying he's not that bad, he's a low-level denier, right? He's level 3 at best, right?
It's only DEFCON 3 right now.
Right.
It could be DEFCON 5, but
yeah. So.
And also I think Rubio I'm going to pick on Rubio, Lil Marco, a little bit here,
Hello,
and
Rubio.
he's a little upset because he wasn't picked. Not that he was really gunning for the position, but also like this picking Bridenstine shows that the administration does not really care about Rubio's thoughts on the matter. I mean, Rubio comes from Florida, space state, and everything, but he seemed. It a little bit probably seems like he feels a little left out. And I think for Bill Nelson, it's a little bit of that too. That it's, hey, we didn't really get, notice about this. We didn't, give you our concerns. We don't want space policy to become controversial, which, I agree that space policy shouldn't be controversial. Like it has previously been a bipartisan issue. But I just think that there's some nefarious purpose to Rubio's bashing of Bridenstine. I think Rubio is making it a political issue, whereas Bridenstine, I mean, having met the guy a number of times and heard him speak, he legitimately cares about space issues. I mean, there are concerns, and not to say that I'm suddenly like on his side on everything. I do have concerns too about how he feels about climate change, but like you said, he's a low-level threat. And really, when it comes to NASA, my big concerns are, what is the civil space program's strategic goals for the next 10 to 20 years, which he has specifically called out in the Space Renaissance Act as a major step towards solidifying the future of NASA, and
That's
also what commercial
point.
space flight's going to look like for the next 10 to 20 years, because that's one of the major sort of points of contention right now is like how much commercial space flight is good for the economy and how much is going to overload it and potentially crash that very small economy. His experience with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and with people in industry is going to add a nice perspective, I think, to this very academic issue sometimes.
Yeah, that's the first point that you brought up, though. Just talking about civil space and what his concerns are about civil space, and at the just being involved in some of the effectively lobbying that we've had to do. We've run into Bridenstine a couple times, but what is his position in terms of civil space, Moon versus Mars?
So,
do we? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not.
So the first thing that comes to mind is I heard him speak at the Future Space Leaders Conference in 2016. Future Space Leaders is this conference. It's a bunch of young people who present papers to staffers and congressmen on the Hill. And Bridenstine was like the keynote speaker and everything. And from what I can tell is he's kind of it doesn't matter where we go so long as we have the plan in place and we're developing the capabilities for it. Which
It's kind of interesting because we kind of have to develop a plan like during his tenure. So
so that's I think what is why he's a good pick is that he understands that it's nuanced. He's not like going in saying, okay, we're only doing Moon, when if we do, the budget analysis and all that, it says, oh, Mars is probably more cost effective in the long term because that is our ultimate goal. Instead of doing 2 planetary or human planetary missions, we only do one of them. It might in the long term be more, a lot easier and cost a lot less. He would be swayed by that. I mean, he is someone that has looked at the data when it comes to these budgetary analyses and will change his mind based on what is best for the space program and what is best for the taxpayer. Of course, NASA is still only 0.5% of the federal budget. You as a taxpayer are only paying like pennies on the dollar every time that you pay taxes to NASA. So he's one of those people that I guess sort of like me is, it doesn't really matter where we go so long as we have that plan in place that's based on the best technical know-how and budgetary analysis that we can muster. And also utilizing commercial spaceflight to its fullest capabilities. There are plenty of people out there who say, oh, like, let's just give like $10 billion to SpaceX and they'll figure everything out. Well, that's a stupid idea. And, that's not how space policy is done.
That's also not how contracting should be done.
That's also not how contracting is done. And if Bridenstine came out and said, we're just going to give SpaceX $10 billion, or even if he said, let's give ULA $10 billion, I would probably be at NASA headquarters with a protest sign, the first protest for the space program.
The commercial side, as they always have, will help us on the next NASA mission.
They will be supplementary. It will not be. They will not be the primary source of the space program. I mean, shuttling astronauts to the ISS or to this Deep Space Gateway or the Deep Space Transport might be contracts that commercial space picks up, and that's what I sort of mean by that auxiliary, secondary purpose. Of course, they will also be the ones that build the Deep Space Gateway and the Deep Space Transport and parts of SLS. Everything's built by a commercial entity. It's just how those contracts are set up and how much say NASA gets in the overall design and architecture of that program. So SpaceX and Boeing have been given pretty much free license on developing their commercial crew programs. But for Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin that are building the Orion capsule and SLS, they're basically following blueprints from NASA. They don't really get much say in how tall the thing's going to be or how much fuel it's going to carry. NASA determines that based on their contract. So having that healthy balance between the traditional civil space side, the contracting and giving a company the blueprint to build something, and the laissez-faire space side, finding a balance between those two is going to be integral to our future strategy in space exploration, both human and robotic.
Okay, so with that said, we can continue that discussion on Facebook. Just remember to follow us on facebook.com/adastrapodcast. We will be open to answering any questions that you might have or might be confused on Jim Bridenstine, the new pick. But just make sure to hit us up on facebook.com/adastrapodcast.
Yeah, or tweet at us and send us your angry emails. But I mean,
level 3 Denier, he's a level 4 now.
I would say he's more of a class B Denier.
Chaotic good Denier.
I would probably say he's like a lawful neutral, like sort of lawful neutral on the side of lawful evil, but like still sort of neutral on most things, or on most things that we really care about.
On Peggy Whitson. Peggy Whitson we've talked about Peggy in the past. She's best known for breaking a number of records. The most popular of which is the amount of time that she has actually been away from the Earth and in space, and either on board the International Space Station, coming to and from the International Space Station, or walking on the thing. But on Saturday, September 2nd, astronaut Peggy Whitson finally touched down in Kazakhstan at 9:21 p.m. alongside a fellow American and Russian in their Soyuz capsule, wrapping up another record-breaking mission. She spent 288 days, that's more than 9 months, on this latest mission aboard the International Space Station. Over the course of her career, as I said, she's accumulated 665 days in space, longer than any American ever, and more time than any woman worldwide, which goes without saying. Right? Whitson is a biochemist, and she broke the record, and we reported on it here back in April, on her 534th day in orbit, as President Trump called her to offer congratulations, and they discussed the timetable for sending humans to Mars. Jack really loved that story.
Within 4 years. Great.
So just some other things that Peggy's known for. She is the world's oldest female astronaut. Sorry, Peggy. 57 years old.
She doesn't look older than 29, though.
She really doesn't. Apparently, going to space keeps you young. So, guys, we should really fund it.
I don't know. Have you taken a look at Scott Kelly?
What are you trying to say about Scott?
I'm not going to say anything more. The listeners can insinuate what I mean.
She's the most experienced female spacewalker. She's had 10 spacewalks at this point. And she is the first woman to have commanded the space station twice. Expedition 16 in 2007 was the other mission in which she commanded the ISS. Congrats to Peggy. She doesn't seem to really, I don't know, embrace everyone's praise of her for the record breaking. The basic notion that she gives in a lot of the interviews that I've seen is, I don't know what the future holds, but people should be breaking records in space. Otherwise, what's the point? That's effectively her stance on it. I mean, that's the whole reason that we're doing space flight in the first place, is new discoveries, to go on new missions, and to break all types of records to the point where we can barely even keep track of all the records that we're breaking. But were you going to say something, Jack?
I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, she is probably one of my biggest inspirations. I mean, I know we were just joking about, everything about, being in space for so long and its effects on the human body, but like she is a trooper. I mean, I'm looking at photos right now from Bill Ingalls, the official photographer for NASA. I mean, she, like, while all the other astronauts, Jack Fisher and the other one's name is Fyodor Yurchikhin. Yurchikhin?
Yurchikhin, yes.
Yeah. So both of them sort of seem completely spent after, arriving in Kazakhstan. And Peggy's just got her shades on and she's like, all right, I'm ready to do that again. I mean, she is, one badass person. is what I'll say.
And I can go on about Peggy's accomplishments and praise for her. But I'm just going to say, congrats, Peggy. You are an inspiration. Thank you for all of your service in your time in space. But one thing that we'll get to now, and this will leap us right into international news, is that ESA had to lend a hand with Peggy, with Peggy actually landing, as well as the other two astronauts. One of the consequences of Hurricane Harvey, this is sort of a domino effect that came about, was the delayed takeoff for NASA's G5 plane out of Houston that was supposed to go and pick them up. And in order to cope with the delay and start with post-flight science as soon as possible, ESA and NASA had to work out their own plan. An ESA plane would retrieve the two NASA astronauts in Kazakhstan and bring them back directly to Cologne, which is the home of ESA's astronaut center. They finally landed safely in Germany at about 14:30 yesterday. So ESA had to lend a little bit of a hand. It's great that both of those organizations just quickly got together to solve a problem. ESA saw that the U.S. was dealing with Hurricane Harvey. Its director even came out with a statement saying that, our thoughts go out to everyone affected by Harvey, our American colleagues and their friends and families, and that they welcome, Jack and Peggy as citizens of Earth, and will do everything to make them feel comfortable. That it was just a great show of cooperation by the ESA, just helping out NASA. I mean, those two organizations work together so much already. We have assets in space that we run cooperatively. The International Space Station is an example of international cooperation, and we needed one last example to get Peggy home, from Kazakhstan to Cologne to finally here. I think she arrived in Colorado yesterday, I want to say. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Peggy's home.
Yeah. And also just proves that space is an international effort. It is a worldwide effort, and the borders and dividing lines that we draw between countries and regions and people break away sometimes when it comes to the exploration of space as a species. We can wax poetic all we want, but I think there's some latest in tech,
Latest in tech,
specifically around the SLS or
yeah. So
the Space Launch System.
So I posted a couple of really cool YouTube videos actually. NASA filmed the final fire test of the RS-25 engine flight controller unit that's going to be used in the Space Launch System in SLS. This final test took place on August 30th, 2017 at Stennis Space Center, which is near Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. The 500-second hot fire test is the fifth of the RS-25 engine flight controller units on the A1 test stand. They had a number of these this summer. I believe they had 3 this summer, and this is the last of those tests. But it was really interesting when you get a chance, take a second and look at the video. Like they have very up close, in-depth footage of the rocket fuel actually burning and some of the smoke coming out. It's really interesting. As far as the RS-25 and how it relates to SLS, 4 RS-25 engines are going to be integrated with the SLS rocket with the Orion spacecraft during the first test flight in Exploration Mission 1, or EM1 as it's colloquially known. Controller communicates with the SLS flight computers to ensure that the engines are performing at accurate levels. The new flight controllers are a critical component of engine modification. And during the tests, the controllers are installed on a developmental RS-25 engine, which is then fired in the same method. So that test is another step closer towards our U.S. mission to return to human deep space exploration missions, which it's just a really freaking cool thing to say. I know I've been saying really cool thing for like the last 2 weeks.
Or for the last 25 episodes.
For the last 25 episodes, but this is really a really neat thing to watch. And these are powerful engines too. That's something to remember. The 4 engines are going to generate a combined 2 million pounds of force, or 8,900 kilonewtons of thrust at liftoff. So that can lift a massive shuttle. With the boosters, the total thrust at liftoff is going to actually exceed 8 million pounds of force, which, I mean, that's an insane record-breaking, amount of thrust. And I look forward to it. So, the tests, which began in 2015, are conducted by a team at NASA Aerojet Rocketdyne, actually, and Syncom Space Services, between their engineers and operators. So, yeah. Best of luck. I was glad to see that the RS-25 engine tests went off without a hitch. And we will see going forward for SLS and the M1 mission, if there are any other hurdles that they need to jump over aside from the norm.
Yeah, I was going to say there's always going to be hurdles. It's the U.S. space program. Come on.
Yeah, of course. So let's see. Moving on to another really interesting YouTube video. I wouldn't call this one cool because it's kind of depressing, but NASA did release some Hurricane Harvey footage as seen from space, combining a number of different sources of space data. So what's interesting is back on August 25th, NASA astronaut Jack Fisher, one of the folks that was actually carried down with Peggy, he took a photograph of Hurricane Harvey from the cupola module aboard the International Space Station as it intensified on its way toward the Texas coast. The Expedition 52 crew on the station had been tracking the storm for 2 days prior to August 25th when he took the picture, and they were capturing Earth observation photographs and videos from their vantage point in low Earth orbit. Their image of the storm just further demonstrated how vicious it was, and you can find them on NASA's website. This past week, though, And they brought this up in the most recent episode of This Week at NASA, which is another great podcast that you guys should listen to. NASA got together with other partner agencies to use space-based assets to capture imagery of Hurricane Harvey that impacted the Texas-Louisiana Gulf Coast region. Imagery captured from that vantage point provided data that weather forecasters, emergency responders, and other officials can use to better inform the public. There's actually a great YouTube video, once again, demonstrating that, which is in the show notes. But this pieced together some of the views from ISS, once again, and NOAA's GOES East satellite, which show the massive size and movement of the storm. Along some of the other data sources included the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission. They analyzed the storm's record-breaking rainfall, which led to catastrophic flooding that we've heard about all week. And due to the storm, Johnson Space Center in Houston was actually closed throughout Labor Day. But they were able to pull all of these data sources together while the region has been recovering, in order to give folks a good view of what is a good view of what is happening with the storm with a high level of accuracy. So combining data sources, getting folks together, and trying to get a better point of view.
So that's, as we sort of continue on through hurricane season, the images and videos from space are impressive, but what's even more impressive is how we're able to predict the direction, the intensity, and the potential landfall of many of these major storms. Hurricane Irma is currently off the coast of the Lesser Antilles, heading towards the Caribbean, and just 3 hours ago, as of recording this, on the 4th, Governor Rick Scott of Florida has declared a state of emergency across the state. So for all of our listeners and followers, please, if you are in Florida, evacuate, find somewhere safe. For all of those affected by Harvey, we will be helping in every way that we can from up here in DC.
Yeah. So finally, coming soon to space on September 15th, and I feel like there should be like some funeral music or some or something playing to this, just a very, very very somber fugue, if you could, Tom. But on September 15th, NASA's Cassini spacecraft will finally end its historic mission to Saturn and its many moons. That's heartbreaking to hear. I mean, it's something that's been planned. It's something that we knew, that we've been planning on happening. But I mean, the mission was just so impactful, and so worthwhile. We've learned so much over 13 years of just groundbreaking observations. Cassini, I read it once that said Cassini has provided enough data to fill more than 4,000 scientific papers. That's insane.
Yeah. And I mean, just some of the images that they've sent. So, again, going back to our vote that we had, a couple months ago, Saturn won just hands down with 53 votes for the favorite planet of Ad Astra's listeners. And I would say in large part that is due to Cassini.
Absolutely. I honestly don't think that would have been the case 13 years ago before Cassini.
I mean, Cassini launched close to 20 years ago. Is in October. Actually, Cassini will have been in space for 19 years and 11 months to the day. It launched on October 15th, 1997. It was, entered its orbit of Saturn on July 1st of 2004. And since then, these last 13 years have been an amazing experience around the ringed planet.
Observation after observation. So Cassini, as we discussed a few episodes ago, I believe, it's now undertaking its final series of 22 so-called grand finale orbits, designed to bring it ever closer to its ultimate demise. Those orbits are going to take the probe through the gap between Saturn's inner rings and the planet's swirling cloud tops. Cassini's final orbit, and this is why this is in this episode of Coming Soon to Space, will be on September 9th. And it's going to send it through the outermost fringes of Saturn's atmospheres, passing just 1,680 kilometers above the clouds. 2 days later, Cassini will make a final 119,000 kilometer flyby of Saturn's largest moon, Titan, which is, once again, one of its greatest, one of the things that we've been able to pull so much data from. The gravitational perturbations that are caused by the Titan flyby are supposed to slow the spacecraft down and reposition it for a final descent into Saturn's atmosphere. And then from there, Cassini is going to take its final images of Saturn on September 14th and send back its last look at the moon's Titan and Enceladus. Like, they couldn't make this more dramatic if they tried.
Let's be honest. They tried to make this as dramatic as possible.
That's very true. That's very true. So yeah, they're also going to take pictures of the hexagon-shaped vortex around Saturn's North Pole and weird propeller pattern features in the rings. The spacecraft will then turn its antenna towards Earth and begin a communications link that will continue until the end of the mission. Cassini will use those final hours to send super high-detailed, high-resolution observations of things like Saturn's auroras and temperatures, as much data as we can get being effectively in the atmosphere of Saturn, as much as it can before we just lose communication with it in its final death plunge.
Death plunge.
It's death plunge. I made that up.
I think that's exactly what it is. I want there to be a science-themed metal band called Cassini Death Plunge.
Cassini Death Plunge. I'm down. I'm here for it. So yeah, Cassini's got 12 instruments, and basically they're all going to be screaming data back at Earth as it's going down. And we will wish it a fond goodbye. A
very somber moment. What I think is so interesting is that by the time we receive the last message from Cassini, it will have already been destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it takes about 66 or 67 minutes to send data from Saturn to Earth. Mm-hmm. And by the time we get get one of the last messages, Cassini will be gone.
For over an hour. Yeah. Yeah.
Ghost messages from space.
So, yeah. Once again, we could wax poetically about Cassini. I think we'll have 2 more episodes to do so.
Yeah. Well, and if you come to the to be determined Planetary Society event in Washington D.C. on September 14th, you can wax poetic with us as well.
There you go. Wow, nice plug. Good job. There's our other Coming Soon in Space. Please provide a link to the listeners for that one.
Absolutely. When the link is available, I will be posting it. I'll be posting it everywhere.
Once again, speaking of links being posted, please make sure to go to the links in the show notes to find out how you can donate to the victims of Hurricane Harvey. Once again, there's the American Red Cross, Global Giving, Airbnb, but those aren't even close to all of the organizations that are helping out. There's tons of people helping out in many different ways. I had a conversation, interestingly enough, about how how folks in the U.S. just are able to organize so quickly now after some of these disasters, after things like 9/11 and Katrina that seem to really have had an impact on our own culture. And we're able to spin up, Red Cross has been an organization since forever, right? But, we're able to spin up the utility of different organizations like Airbnb in order to get folks like that to help out in any way we can. We're able to organize them. So yeah, make sure to check out the links in the show notes. And I think that's it for the week.
Yeah, it's a little bit shorter episode. It's only 50 minutes long. But yeah, so of course, as well as following those links, if you have an idea for a t-shirt design, be sure to send that to us by September 30th. We're going to be plugging it on social media, Twitter. You will not be able to escape from this contest. You get a free t-shirt, get to come on the show for a couple, for about 10 minutes, and you get our undying gratitude. So I mean, it's super simple. So send your PNG files, 300 DPI, 14 by 16 inches. You know the drill. No more than 3 colors to adastra@elemental.fm by September 30th at 11:59 p.m. And yeah,
don't forget to rate us on iTunes. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes.
Recommend us on
like
Overcast.
Us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Do all of the other social media things.
Yeah, tell your friends and family all about us, and also to all of those who I met at Escape Velocity here in DC. If you are listening, thank you for tuning in. It was a great chance to meet all of you, and I look forward to interacting with all of you in the future.
Great. All right.
Well, all right. So as always, I'm Jack,
and I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.